que fuerte al amanecer. No tienes por qué correr.
Kevin, me heard about 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. That's a thing, right?
It is a thing, yeah.
So how you make bacon at 6 degrees?
You can't.
How it must take forever.
Good morning, South by Southwest community. All right.
I am super excited to be here at South by Southwest. Because we are on the far side of the moon, we actually can't communicate with the ground. My husband's here. Did you know about that? If you need to find something in the house during that time, sorry.
I hear Austin got some amazing barbecue, so I can't say it yet because I ain't been to Austin barbecue yet. And I know Texas people don't play, so you're not about to get me in trouble.
Look, everyone's always had something to hide, Guy. You all close your bathroom door, right? We have a world that is defined by various power asymmetries in which those in power can often weaponize or misuse intimate information about us.
Sydney is an innovation city. It is the home of great companies like Atlassian and Canva. It is also the home of some of the world's leading quantum technologies and research. So Sydney, yes, we have beautiful beaches, great coffee, but we also have beautiful minds, and you should come and spend some time with us.
Tilda Swinton or Idris Elba?
Idris Elba.
Idris Elba or Daniel Craig?
Idris Elba.
Idris Elba or Riz Ahmed?
Idris Elba.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'm always so excited to be back at South by. The most fun audiences are here. People who just want to be entertained and they want something interesting, they want something they've never seen before. Love being in Austin. You know, no more exciting crowds to premiere a film to.
Hey everybody, how are you? It's great to see you.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
It's great to be with you. My name's Sam Gill. I'm the president of Doris Duke Foundation, which works to build a more creative, equitable, and sustainable future. I'm really excited to be in conversation with Nabiha Syed, who leads the Mozilla Foundation and is easily one of the most visionary voices today on the topic of technology and society broadly. Before we get into that conversation, first of all, I just want to thank Sue and MPAC for convening Muslim House again. This is just an absolutely incredible space, so thank you so much for having us. And then I also just want to give a shout out to my colleagues, Zeba Rahman, who leads our work to build a more diverse media ecosystem through U.S. Muslim Voices. So Zeba, big shout out to you. And also, Ashley Farrow-Murray is here, and she leads our work in the performing arts, and in particular has inaugurated an incredible new area of work for us around technology and the performing arts, which we'll talk about today as well. So Ashley, shout out to you as well. All right. Well, good. So we're going to get into it. We'll have some time for questions, which are comments that have a question mark at the end. So be thinking about them as we go through the conversation today. But Nabiha, it's really exciting to be with you here today. And I kind of, before we get into some of the kind of more concrete issues around technology and artificial intelligence and creativity, I wanted to start with more of a philosophical question, which is, I think that a lot of the folks who are in the room today, pursue and represent an idea that as a society we benefit from a wider array of perspectives and voices, that one of the roles of media and media technology is to create access for new voices, for new ideas, to reach new people in new ways. That sort of was the early ethos of the internet.
Yep.
And certainly Mozilla, I think, has championed sort of the openness of the internet in part to serve that set of ideas. So could you just talk a little bit about sort of the state of that idea today?
I would love to. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to MPAC. Thank you to folks making the time during a busy South by schedule. And I love this topic. I was a First Amendment media lawyer before this, so maximizing voices is an important end. So it's funny, there's a lot you can say about how bad the internet is right now and how difficult it is for mental health and other things, and also I was chatting with an old colleague of mine when I was at BuzzFeed, and he reminded me that about 8 years ago, we used to host a Ramadan live show. We were both fasting and out of our minds as a result. And we would bring on Muslim creators that we had scoured on Twitter, when it was called Twitter, to find and bring on, and it was so difficult. And he was comparing that moment 8 years ago to now, when you scroll through TikTok and you have people who are not Muslim anticipating like Muslim Met Gala, which is like Eid outfits, and talking about like the Ramadan cats. And like, not only are there more voices talking about real deep cuts in ways that are translating across groups that just, it was unimaginable 8 years ago, right? It was unimaginable when I was growing up to see those kinds of voices. And so in the proliferation of these media technologies, and there are so many options as well as so many ways to engage, whether it's through text or through, through images or through video, across languages in different places, we are living the dream of the maximization of voices. Now, the incentive structures of these platforms, the realities of what they amplify and, what they do to the markets around it, different problem. But just on the maximization of voices front, it is really beautiful to see how many different voices are present and having an influence and reaching and bridging to others.
And what do you think, we will get to sort of the dark side, of course, that maybe most of the time.
Always get to the dark side.
But staying on the positive, one of the things, you mentioned you were a First Amendment lawyer at BuzzFeed, which not only reached new people, but sort of changed what news was in ways that have been caricatured, but I think were more profound than, it helped to make listicles a bigger part of the news. You also you were the publisher of a media startup around technology and society. One of the other things that it seems to me we've seen facilitated by digital technology is not only that there are new voices that have access to, what used to be called the audience, and new people who are part of that audience. There's new ways of reaching those people, right? So, it's the transition from newspapers to digital news isn't just that the news goes online, but there's new ways of communicating information that are more responsive to different kinds of interests. So I'd love to hear about that as well. Like, what's some of the good that you're seeing about kind of more experimental ways that we even present and tell stories or share experiences? Does that excite you, particularly with respect to the kinds of questions that folks in this audience are thinking about?
Yeah, it is actually a golden era for people to engage and consume information as well as entertainment in a variety of different mediums, right? So if you think that it used to be, if you wanted depth of knowledge of something, you had to read about it. That's not everyone's, favorite way to understand something. But the time we live in now allows you, certainly there are many critiques of the meme as a vector for deep information, but it is a spark that might allow you to go deeper. If you don't want to read about something, I don't know about you, but I will YouTube rabbit hole on things for a long time. And that is, again, the proliferation of that ability to access information in a democratized way has been there, but is growing. There's also, so at Mozilla, we've hosted something called the Creative Media Awards for quite some time and been able to play with different interactive formats in order to convey information. So one of my favorite examples is that we did an interactive installation, just a website, that would show you how Snapchat and Facebook, when you think that you're just like talking to your friends, recording a video, is actually like scanning your face for facial recognition to understand how faces communicate. And it walks you through this interactive that when I looked at that, I was like, this would have been a 5,000 to 7,000 word article explaining all of these pieces. But instead of having it be in that format, it allows you to like click this piece and learn more about, keyloggers and other scanning technologies. And it allows you to sort of learn in your own way, in a way that is not just the written word. And that feels special, right? So also audio and podcast as a format. We have so many options. The problem, and I know we're not getting to the dark side yet, but is that it's so fractured and it's so noisy that trying to make sense of it all is quite a challenge, and we end up relying on the algorithm to do it, and therein lies a lot of trouble.
Yeah. And we will go there. I do, but I want to sort of at least one more positive, because I think this thread is really interesting. So, like the example that you gave, that in a mainstream media organization would consider that ancillary content today.
Yeah.
They'd still say the story is the news, and then this is like a feature
Yeah.
to engage people around the news. We had a similar, you've been there at Doris Duke Foundation. We're really privileged to operate this incredible collection of art from global Muslim cultures that Doris Duke collected. And we did like some of our best performing content has been, we did an Instagram reel called just like, what is Islamic art? And it was like, a museum curator would have been like aghast. Like it was very elementary, but people, most people feel lectured to by museums, or they feel embarrassed if they don't understand the level of erudition in a museum.
Or they can't get there. They don't have time. They're not in the same geography.
Yeah, I can't believe everyone can't come to Hawaii where our collection. No, but no, exactly. That's exactly right. And then another example of something we did was we worked with Ubisoft, the French game maker, to put objects with rich context in the game Assassin's Creed. And to me, it's like that is the museum for the audience that encounters it. It's not a gateway to the museum. It's not an advertisement for the museum. It's not less than the museum. Like that is the content. What do I imagine a lot of the folks that are with us today, they're trying to tell new stories, provide new perspectives through really established modalities, film, scripted television, a podcast. What advice would you give people as someone who's thinking both about the ethics that should be animating the way that we communicate information, but also building things? Like, how can we challenge these folks to push the boundaries of sort of what counts as a legitimate way to connect with an audience or tell a story or share an experience? Or what are you seeing that inspires you at Mozilla that's pushing the boundaries and all those questions?
I think this is a great question. I think leaning into the experimentation and the discomfort with not knowing what's going to resonate and what's not, right? And so one reason people might gravitate to traditional forms is that you kind of know where it sits, who it might reach, what it looks like, and that desire to have metrics that you can report on, or an ability to say this was successful or this was not, often motivated by the financial reality that allows something to exist, or your own desire to pay your bills. Like, I understand the conservatism that incentivizes, right? Like, I'm gonna try this thing because I know it works. I think we live in a zany time. That's the adjective I'm gonna choose. And the experimental nature of people just trying different things, whether it is experimenting with like an owl at Duolingo, or actually one of my favorite examples, also a Mozilla thing, because I pay a lot of attention to our content. It was actually from a couple of years ago, where someone was like, you know how when you look on Venmo, you can see and track people's relationships? Like, you can just see what's going on. That's an interesting frontier to interrogate the idea of data privacy, right? Like, if you're like, hey, you need to care about your data privacy, half of the people fall asleep. Probably more than half, right? It's like, yeah, I'm gonna get to that. Also flossing and other things. But if you create a interface that, it was a story. It was, watch this love story rise and decline through Venmo transactions. And it was like you would just swipe through and you're like, oh, okay. Oh, they're going to dinner. oh, what's this exchange for? What's happening?
Is this like you have a friend who's going through Venmo? I mean, do you spend a lot of time looking
No,
at your
I
friend's
do
Venmo?
not. But what it was showing you is that through a Venmo interface, like, right, like they're just like telling the story through Venmo transactions, that much more is being disclosed about your lived reality that you thought was private, but not done in a scaremongering way. It's not like through your Venmo they will send you to Guantanamo. No, it was like, it was just like,
yet.
yeah, we're not at the bad place yet. That's in like 5 minutes. But it was this totally experimental, off-the-wall way to talk about quite a serious and frankly saturated topic. And it was gamified, right? It was through a sort of frontier of like your Venmo transactions that you would not think is a place to do anything. And I think thinking really creatively there is interesting. WeTransfer is also an example. I don't know how many of you have ever downloaded something on WeTransfer. When you're downloading something, there's like really high quality mini documentaries that you can watch while you're downloading. There's all these creative frontiers of understanding where you have people's attention, and those are all rich terrain to experiment with. Every aspect of your life is an area to experiment with, and I know that that's not always easy to take those risks, but that's the opportunity of having your knowledge and information and entertainment mediated through all these different spaces. Each one also provides rich terrain for you to play with.
I mean, that's an interesting. I never really thought about that. I mean, I think that's an interesting vector of sort of around the way technology can be used that I think doesn't get talked about a lot. I think what tends to get discussed so much that it's become implicit is the way in which the ability for digital technology to lower kind of the marginal cost of producing a form of expression and the marginal cost of acquiring the next set of eyeballs really does make it cheaper to aggregate what would otherwise be niche audiences, whether that's affinity or whether that's a social identity or a religious identity or some combination thereof. I think we don't talk as much about the way in which the internet it has the potential. I think it usually does the opposite, unfortunately, in the way it's commercialized, but has the potential to make features of ourselves visible that aren't always in regular settings, right? So I mean, I think so much of the content. So like, I think about some of the kind of Building Bridges fellows that we've been able to support through organizations like Sundance and others, and hopefully some of them are here with us today. What I find so powerful about some of the stories that those folks tell is that how little they are about someone's identity as a Muslim, but actually about sort of making visible these other aspects of all of our identities, and then of course the way these things go together. And I wouldn't have thought of Venmo as actually making aspects of people that I know visible in a different way through the transactions. I think now, kind of going to the dark side, it seems to me part of the challenge is that doesn't really feel like it's in our control. What is made visible and for what purpose and how to organize that. Like, are there things that you guys are working on at Mozilla that are trying to like harness those tools in a way that feels as liberatory as sort of what you, or at least as intriguing as what you just described?
Yeah, I mean, to stick with the Venmo example, and I will say the funniest interaction I had around the Venmo example, because I recently like recirculated it, was from a mentee of mine who was like, wait, does this mean that my mom could figure out my secret boyfriend? And I was like, yes, lock down your Venmo, girl, and also make better choices. But which is to say that part of illustrating in an unconventional way you can call it a risk or you can call it the surprise of that kind of disclosure is the predicate for any choice that you might want to make. In this Venmo example, it is the choice to change your security settings, right? There's so many things that people just don't think about. And so we do a lot of work in that kind of advocacy space around like, okay, well, now that you've learned this, what is it that you could be doing? But it has its limits, obviously. Like, not all change happens through individual-oriented choice advocacy, and it shouldn't be, but it's at least the beginning of it. And then around AI, we're doing a lot of AI literacy work that isn't just designed to be like, now you know how to make a deep fake, right? Like, it's not meant to be instrumentalized necessarily. That could be a choice that you make. But we're more interested in the idea of AI literacy through the lens of enabling everything from knowledgeable resistance. Like, if you hate the way you think this technology is going to be commercialized, you should know as much about it as possible to critique it effectively, because the best critiques are ones that are rooted in the depth of knowledge, I think, in order to dismantle, dissuade, or redirect deployment, all the way to, like, here are some cool ways that you could be using AI. If you, for example, are in charge of a fan fiction community, and you're like, can I bring this to life in some other way, right? So we're engaging in a lot of literacy work in order to open up those universes of knowledgeable engagement with technology, which is tricky given how quickly it evolves, but that's why it's fun.
Are there things though that you're it is? I mean, I think it is really. It is interesting, the Venmo example. The visible appearance is such a powerful heuristic in our world, in the world that we live in the world that sort of the human species has mostly known. Although what it connotes obviously has changed over time. But I'm sure a lot of the people in this audience, are either have experienced adversely the power of visible appearance, or they're making great art that is confounding sometimes the assumptions we make based on visible appearance. Are you guys doing anything that you think points toward what a different internet could have been around sort of alternatives to visible appearance? Like, are you guys building any products that are or tools that look like a Venmo or a social media platform kind of for a pro-social purpose, where people can present these more expansive ideas of who they are without that feeding some kind of engagement engine?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, but I'll back up before I give you a specific example. So I joined Mozilla like 7 months ago, and one of the things that drew me to the organization was thinking about how what we live in now technologically is just the imagination of a handful of weirdos that decided something, and we're like literally living in someone else's imagination, right? Every time you interact with Facebook, that was like someone's imagination of what connectivity or connecting the world could look like. To have an imagination deficit right now, to relegate imagination to the realm of a few people in Silicon Valley, is fatal, right? Like, how dare we say, well, the entire terrain of our engagement can just be in how we decide to use tools that someone else imagined. So actually, the act of imagining alternatives, whether it's alternative histories of like how it could have gone, or totally different futures, becomes vital work, right? It's not like entertainment work or work that's over there. These are literally like stories that fuel the imagination of what the world could look like, is extraordinarily important, and we can't afford to lose that muscle. And what I loved about Mozilla is that Mozilla was sort of born out of that kind of defiant optimism on something as boring as the browser, right? Where now 25 years ago, there was a fight between some open source advocates and Mark Andreessen, and about whether a browser source code should be closed or whether it should be open so you could see the code, you could engage with the code, you could change the code, you could fork it and do your own thing. And Mozilla, the Firefox browser, was born out of that, right? The belief, like defiantly optimistic belief that like, if we make things transparent, you can decide to take it however you want to go. And so that to me was like, that's imagination, right? It's actually saying we have the humility to believe that like a few people are not the ones who get to decide what everything looks like. Our job is to create building blocks so other people do that. So that's like the philosophical backdrop of like what Mozilla is up to. Fast forward to now, we're doing a lot of imagination-oriented work, like we're, funding a lot of people who are thinking about alternative futures, engaging with creative assemblies of people who work in Arab futurism, Afrofuturism, alternative futurist sort of approaches to be like, well, what do you think the good world could look like? Can we start to think about anything besides dystopia? It's so easy to imagine dystopia because it's here. But to only marinate in dystopian thinking removes the imaginative skill that we need to actually imagine what the good world looks like. So we are doing the imagination level work, then jumping to products, right? Because we build stuff. one of my favorite examples of what we do is a product called Common Voice. It's the world's largest open source voice data set, 200 different languages, born out of a very simple example, or a simple observation, which is like tech companies are gonna make a voice data set of, you know, like a certain type of Arabic, or Mandarin, or Spanish, or a particular dialect of French, but they might not for Egyptian Arabic, and they might not for Sindhi, and they might not for Cantonese. So who's gonna make that? And if someone doesn't make that voice data set, what happens to how we use that language, to what it's embedded in? How do we interact with it? And we were like, oh, that's a tough observation. Let's just build it, right? So we just built these data sets, and we build them with communities. We go and we fly and we meet with people, and we're like, hey, we're gonna make this particular data set of Sindhi, and we're gonna work with all these community members, have women's voices and male voices and kids and elder people. And that's all to say that what we imagined was the creation of technologies that could serve many people and then be used subsequently by them. It's a building block. What people do with it, that's on them. But that's our role, right? Our role is to be like, what are the interventions that we see we could alternatively imagine and then give to people who then take those open data sets and like, we just got an example of someone who was translating a bunch of Lollywood films into a particular Nigerian dialect. And I was like, did not see that coming, love this for you, right? And so how do we enable that creativity is kind of where our head's at.
I want to ask you a couple questions about that, but I think first I do think the way you sort of describe the way you describe I think the kind of the outlook of the domestic technology industry is quite right. Like I think it's surprisingly few people that really are in control of a lot of the capital. But I think more importantly, as you indicate, sort of the vision that's animating the way that capital is allocated and the way that tools are built. I also think, you know, I've participated in this mistake. I think we made the mistake of referring to sort of the extreme version of the Silicon Valley ideology that, by the way, has been celebrated at South by Southwest for a long time as libertarian. I don't actually think it is libertarian. I mean, libertarianism is the idea that the kind of the most unrestricted scope of action is intrinsically good, and it's born of an idea that sort of all the sort of liberal philosophies share, that, you know, what makes our species unique is we make our own plans. We're the authors of our own fate to the extent that we can be. And I don't think Silicon Valley is that libertarian. In fact, the kinds of constraints they hate are the constraints that are imposed by popular rule. I can think it's called like regulatory agencies and institutions. I think they think they know better. And I think you're right. I think they're inspired by sort of a whole generation of science fiction that has led them to see a vision of what they think is better. I guess one question I have a couple questions though that hopefully have some practical bearing for this audience. But if not, you know, too bad. No, but that hopefully will be useful to you.
We have Q&A later. You can ask those.
The first is like those companies, and more importantly, that outlook is taking over the entertainment industry. And so one question is, you know, what does that mean for the people here? Like, should people keep telling stories in what, you know, you and I would call legacy formats, or should they find other pathways to tell stories, because there's going to sort of be no escape from the giant sucking sound of that dystopian vision?
Ooh, I mean, I think what the disaggregation of these technologies affords us is the ability to create communities around particular types of stories that, if you were to allow someone else who's a distributor to make that decision, they would distill it to the lowest common denominator, right? And so what you have now is the ability to say, okay, I'm going to make this work for a particular niche community, and also I can build up support for that. I can show that, you know, 20,000 people follow this account and they're gonna care about it. You have the ability to do that. But the reason I'm not framing that as like, yay, isn't that a great opportunity? Because what it also does is put this like tremendous pressure to have metrics on everything, right? Like, not just because an idea has 20,000 or some concept has like 20,000 followers on Instagram doesn't actually mean that, like, one, that it's good. Two, do we need storytellers to be all things, like also growth marketers on social platforms, in order to be a person who's given the ability to tell a particular story? And so I want to offer those caveats in sort of like the opportunity that's presented now. But there is still some, I mean, compared to 30 years ago, right, where actually the decisions were then made just by a few gatekeepers who wouldn't even entertain the idea. What we have now is the ability to spark the potential, but it is still a tremendous amount of work. And so I'm like very skeptical of the sort of like Panglossian, like sort of like, no, it's so great, now you can do anything, you can tell any story, it's so amazing, because that erases the labor that is required to do that. And also it is worth noting that there are still some stories that, like, unless packaged in an extremely careful way, don't really get told, particularly because how they're mediated through particular platforms. And to be more specific about that, when I was at the Markup, one of the big investigations we did was about shadow banning of Palestinian content on Instagram. And there were no shortage of creators who, in a variety of ways, whether it was showing the joy and creativity of people who were under the most brutal violence you could imagine, but like still living their full lives, so not just disaster porn, or people who were like showing like real grief and stories, no matter what engagement they had on this particular topic, it was just being silenced. And in fact, I mean, and the numbers were undeniable, so much so that, like, in our newsroom, we were like, there's no way not to talk about this. It's actually really clear. And even the story about those stories then ended up being shadow banned, right? And so it's like, whenever we talk about the opportunity that's possible here, about what we can do, there are still limits to that. There's still limits to that because, ultimately, platforms are beholden to a particular set of metrics and pressures and political pressures. They are truly not libertarian. And so those limitations on the stories that get told are still there.
Yeah, I mean, they're businesses in a society. I think, and this I think is the right way. You know, we held off for a while. I mean, I think this is the right way to come at the issue of the algorithm, you know, which has now itself become sort of memeified. Like, everyone knows that that's playing some role in what people see and how they see it. But I think the way that you describe it is really important to underline and to further elucidate, right? Which is the operators of digital content platforms, whether those are social or entertainment or both, and the finance class that's largely venture capital, they use a language that what they're doing is disintermediating, right? They're removing the gatekeeper from between the content creator, which we used to call the artist, and which is its own issue, and the audience. But of course, as you point out, they're actually re-intermediating. They're now the new gatekeeper, and they provide an inclusiveness of production that is distinct from other gatekeepers. And if you work hard enough, an inclusiveness of access to content. But yeah, you know, what you've said I think is really important for people to understand. Just like newspaper editors, you know, just like studio executives at a TV studio, they're making choices, sometimes highly abstracted about whole categories of content, but they're making choices that are about what will be easy or hard to find, what will be promoted and served to audiences or not, on the basis at bottom of an economic interest, but one that, as you point out, is shaped by the need by various political and social exigencies that any business faces. And I think, you know, you pointed to an important dynamic. One challenge there is you can still work really hard on a story that someone is going to block. That person is now faceless. You know, it now is it's a logic rather than a person that you can sort of argue with. And also, I think something that is underappreciated, and certainly, you know, I've been very interested in, is, you know, the choices artists make change radically as a result of that. And I thought you articulated that really well. One is, now you're not just making a film, but you're also selling yourself as a brand and your identity around that film as a creator. That's part of the thing that you're marketing. And I'm sure you know, hopefully we'll hear some of this in the question period. I'm sure there are people in this audience who have made choices they wonder about with regard to what their work was like, how it was produced, what the story choices were, you know, the performances, et cetera, all kinds of creative choices that were calibrated to, you know, is this going to get the right kind of engagement on the platform? Like usually at this point in these conversations, though, it becomes quite hopeless. Like what is there a form of refusal, you know, in that? Or is it to you, in essence, is understanding refusal, just knowing that this is what happening, is itself empowering? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think understanding is actually very empowering, right? And because it allows you to also create some antidote to the pressure. So let us think about another era in which what you had to do was convince the newspaper editor or convince the studio head. You didn't internalize that in this. I mean, it's still an influence. You're like, I'm doing this thing and I hope someone picks it up and, you know, I'm going to pitch it and I'm going to talk to these people. And so there would still be some form of feedback loop into the work that you were doing, but it was episodic and it was very clear and almost theatrical in the moments where you would do it. But the new gatekeeper, which is the algorithm, right? The new gatekeeper is not episodic and not theatrical. It is constant and subtle and nudging and shapes the content that you're consuming and shapes what you think is possible. And so the feedback loop is much shorter, right? And so it's actually ability to shape your own psyche is always on if you're engaging with it. To not know that and to not really critique that would be extremely dangerous, right, to your own creativity. And so I think knowing that that's how it works, understanding the pressures of the algorithm, critiquing it openly, is deeply necessary. That's not a solution. That's just like a way to like protect your own mindset against all these influences. But it is very easy to forget, and then what we would lose is a lot of creativity, right? And the more that AI is already being deployed as part of the recommendation systems of many platforms, the more that AI is used to create things that look like art, that encodes its own biases, that, you know, makes certain renderings more available than others. All of this, like the distance from the creation and how the different tools encode assumptions in it, not being deeply critical of that at every single step of the way is dangerous, right? And so I think actually like the call to action right now is really understanding that. And it's not just like, okay, yeah, no, it can shape my mind. Check, done. Every tool you use, everything you engage with has some element of that push and pull towards some stories, not others. Some types of creativity and not others. Some things are valued and not others, and it will continue to change because the way these technologies are mediating are also evolving.
You know, it's interesting to be having this conversation at South by Southwest because in some ways, the way that SAG-AFTRA responded to AI gestures toward kind of the most radical approach to this question, right? Which is to say, you know, we're just not going to let you make the art that we make that way, right? And I think there were a few things that were, to me, really impressive about SAG-AFTRA's response. I think one was something we didn't talk about earlier with respect to the technology sector is, you know, one of the arguments I think that's being foisted on us is because we have the technical insight into how these systems work, we reserve the right to decide what they should do. So one thing I think SAG-AFTRA said was, look, we don't need to know how these things work to be able to know that they're going to do the work that we do, and we're not going to let them. Secondly, I think there was an interesting sophistication, probably because you have an industry in film and media and television where there is a compensation structure around increments of intellectual property that, like, if this thing is being trained on my work, that also is economically significant. So it's not just that it can do my job, but it can do my job because of me, and I somehow should be compensated for that. But, you know, the sense I get, and I don't know what your conversations have been, the sense I get from talking to folks on the business side of entertainment is, but for that collective bargaining agreement, they would be using these tools a lot more. The technology is already there. So, you know, is, Mozilla builds technology too. Like, but are there moments where you think it's actually the technology is just too dangerous, and that the response should be more SAG-AFTRA-like? That the response should be, you know what? I don't want to make content. I want to make art, and we're going to stop. We're not going to allow digital systems that force me to also be a content creator, to also play the game of driving engagement around the commodity form that this platform is good at. We just need to get rid of that in our life. We seem to have said that in labor in Hollywood. We're close, it sounds like, to saying that for kids, maybe, at least in some communities. Do you have conversations at Mozilla about, are there just places where there's no accommodation and we just need to start to set limits?
Yes, like hiring systems. There's a variety of systems where we're like, AI has no place here, goodbye. But the thing in some of the Hollywood and other creative communities conversations that we have on this sort of imagination pillar of our work is like, content is not art. Like, AI can generate necessarily. They're not necessarily the same. So AI can generate like Pokemon movie number 76. Cool, great. It's fundamentally derivative. Like, there might be, it looks the same. It looks like interesting content. It's consumable. Is that spark of actual creativity, of a unique story, of something that you're like, you know those stories, or you know that work when you see it, where you're like, this is unlike anything else I've ever seen? That's not really what AI does. It's very good at creating derivatives. It's very good at particular shortcuts that like animators need, right? It can remove some of the laborious steps, but that spark of creation, even the people who are the biggest hype people are not really advocating that that's what technology can do. I feel less threatened by the technology in this space and more the business incentives to cheapen and to look for the cheapest opportunity to make some cash, versus the incentive to say, can we find the most unique act of creation and elevate it? That's not really only a technology problem, although technology creates the conditions for, bad choices to be made because it's available and easy and it's cheap. But it's far more, to me, useful to critique the commercial logic around this than it is to just be like, all AI is bad. Although it is, has no place in a variety of systems. There's also other spaces where I'm like, we were doing a set of creative assemblies with an engagement around a creative assembly with fan fiction communities. Like, thinking about how you could, if you write Star Trek fan fiction, right, such an active group of fan fiction writers, what does the availability of this technology, what does it create for you to say, well, actually, I'm going to tell my own story in this way, and it doesn't only have to be in the format of writing. It can be very visually compelling. I can bring the story to life. There's frontiers where you're like, this seems like it's going to get real crazy bananas and wild and interesting, but that's because there are people who are deploying it for creative reasons to bring to life their creative ideas, not just make cash. So it goes back to this we need to critique the commercial incentives here before we do anything else.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions, but if you do have a question, I think we have a mic in the back and you can line up, and so I'll take questions from the audience in a sec if you have them. I guess though, I think on that, it's not, one of the challenges, though, it seems to me, is that the commercial logic isn't just shaping, what content is rewarded. It's shaping the actual commodity form of the content, right? Like the way you turn expression into something that can move around the internet is you turn it into a thing called content, because that's the thing that Instagram can move, and that's the thing that Facebook can move, and that's the thing that X can move. And I guess as I'm listening to you, what I hear is, for some people, that's exciting because there are things they've wanted to do that didn't fit in the commodity form of a book in a commercial publishing industry. But then there's other people for whom we should worry that vitiates the spark, right? So who's the filmmaker here who's making powerful, wrenching documentaries that also doesn't want to be like a social media personality, but now has to make that content? So I guess it sort of turns on, like, are you in control of the choices that are available to you? But I guess here's a question, though, before we go to questions from the audience. You talked about sort of the power, how in some ways how much stories, visions of the future are what are driving technology in such a concerning direction. This is your chance to pitch a bunch of really powerful storytellers on like what are the stories you'd like to see, or what are the angles you'd like to see? What are the new stories we need to push technology in a new direction, or the economic imperatives driving technology in a new direction?
No, I mean, the stories I would like to see is, I love asking people what comes to mind if I ask you about a vision of a good future that you've seen in some sort of content or storytelling, whatever, something you watch and are inspired by. The number of people who will be like, Star Trek or the Jetsons is sort of remarkable, where I'm like, those are your examples, right? Those are your examples, that's it. We don't have other snippets of like what the good world looks like. And if you ask people just what do you think about technology in the future, also you'll get a lot of, and without the modifier of good, just like what do you think about, people will be like Blade Runner, Severance, Black Mirror, all of which are deeply, I don't want to live in those worlds. And so I would love, and we would welcome, and we have a global festival in Barcelona this year where we'll be, screening films and other sort of provocations around, can the future of technology be good? And if so, what does it look like? And I don't need a grand vision, but like 25 years in the future, there's a moment where technology feels good for you. What's the little like 30-second snapshot of that? What's the story that has that? And the reason to do that is to plant a seed that, whether it's us through the product work that we do or other partners of ours, how can we water those plants of an affirmative vision, not utopian, doesn't have to be overly idealistic, but just something that looks good, as some sort of engagement in like the imagination of good futures, not just deciding and relegating ourselves to the bad. Because dystopia is so easy to imagine, it's very close, but we have to exercise the muscle.
Yeah, I wonder too, like, is the question just what is a good future to you, period, and then what are the things technology is doing in that future? Like, I don't know if folks in the audience have watched. I know you have watched. Like robotics is getting like creepily advanced, and I remember watching a video recently of two robots that, with minimal instructions, could work together to unload grocery bags, without being acquainted with the kitchen. And I had a few reactions. One is, the technology is surprisingly impressive. Like, they figured out what goes in the fridge and what goes in the cupboard and how to hand things to each other. Two, it's like weirdly slow. Like, it's painfully slow how quickly they work. Like, you can't leave a fridge open that long. That was one of my reactions. I was like, that's not gonna work. But the third thing was, I don't want to live in a world where slow-moving robots are in my house. I would like to live in a world where like I don't have to unload groceries, but like my vision of what technology is doing in that future is very different. And the slowness makes it creepier, by the way. If they moved a little faster, maybe I could like handle one robot, hanging around that. But like, I don't want a robot waiting for me outside my bedroom, or maybe looming over my bed, while I'm sleeping or whatever. But I mean, I that to me feels like, do people know how to imagine a future without thinking first of technology anymore? And then once they do they have new ideas of what technology can do?
It's so interesting, because when you pose the questions just like, what does a good future look like? People actually, in our experiences so far, which of course not exhaustive, it's not, the pictures they paint are not, oh wow, my self-driving car took me here, right? Yeah. These people will tell you stories of having leisure time with their loved ones, and being in nature, which we desperately hope exists in the future. They'll tell these sort of very universal observations and stories and moments that don't have technology as a part of it at all. And that to me is also really fascinating, right? Of like, okay, in what way do we want technology in the future is maybe part of the question, right? Maybe we don't want them unloading our groceries, but do I want robots, I don't know, doing some other form of deeply laborious, dangerous work that I would rather a human not have to do? Yeah. Groceries feel like we got that. That's okay.
Yeah.
But there's other forms of work where maybe actually I would much rather a human not risk their body and their livelihood to do.
Do we have? I can't. The lights are so bright here, so it looks like. Right.
We have a few people. Is the mic working?
Yeah, it sounds like it's on. If you could just identify yourself as well, just for your fellow audience members.
Sure. My name is Bilal Lakhani, and I lead influencer marketing for Pfizer. And I was struck by what Nabiha was saying about imagining an alternative world and an alternative future, and the fact that so few people determine so many of our choices, whether it's on tech or even storytelling and all of that. And it led me to think about sort of just this space and the beauty of what's been created by sort of Sam and his team and Sue and her team. And the question that I had was, how do we create an alternative sort of ecosystem where we can support each other? So one of the things that, in my role, I was like, okay, how can I bring more Muslim voices as influencers with work that we're doing at Pfizer and other industries that I'm sort of friends with? Like it's now making me ask questions that I haven't asked before. And essentially the question that I have for you all is, how do we create an ecosystem beyond the storytelling part, which we'll talk at the 4 p.m. session, but what do we need around that storytelling ecosystem? The work that you're doing in Mozilla, the work that we can do from brands and businesses standpoint, the work that we need to do with tech and AI. How do we begin to imagine a different future where communities like ours can tell stories, not just from a storytelling point of view, but also from whatever it takes around that to be able to get an audience and traction and impact? So I know it's a big question, but I don't know if there's a short answer or a long one.
Great. And maybe we'll take a couple questions at once and then can address them together, but thank you for that. Also, great buzz marketing for the 4 p.m. session. All right, who's up next?
Hey, I'm Amber. I'm in the music business that we obviously are seeing a lot of this happen. So this is going to be a little stacked, but I deal a lot with legacy management that has a lot to do with NIL, name, image, likeness, the voice being the likeness. The estate that I'm working with right now, we are the second to the Beatles, that has taken a 360 model of the voice of the artist that's no longer here, and we've produced the music, but we've used her 360 model to sing studio quality on the album. How do you guys see this going with AI? How do you see AI licensing of NIL transpiring in the and laws matching that evolution? Comparable segment is music or the Mechanical Licensing Collective. Back in the day, you would have to go get a license to cover a song. Now you just cover a song, and MLC will go through and recognize any iteration of that and allow that license to be bundled up into the MLC. So it's an automatic. What I'm kind of saying is, like, we're not trying to say, oh, you can't use this artist's voice. We're just saying, if you do, you're going to pay a license for it. But the laws are not there yet. So how do you guys see the laws covering NIL?
So we've got sort of what's a more expansive future, and then maybe what are the laws that we need to get there? Do you want to comment generally on any of that?
Sure. I mean, first, I think ecosystem thinking is exactly right. If we don't think about the full ecosystem, you can just have a proliferation of great stories and no way to make a livelihood doing that work, right? Which is not a future that I want. What I want in the future is a future where artists can just focus on art and create and also pay their grocery bills and their rent and be happy. That is not a very radical idea of the future, but it does feel increasingly more difficult. And so that's yes to thinking in terms of an ecosystem. I think there are a lot of ingredients in that, right? So if you think of as a place that's focused on creating products, we think about our commitment to the ecosystem as okay, can we make open source products that are freely used by anybody? So we're removing some of the gates around oh no, I have to pay to use this software, I have to pay to use this. Are we making something more available that otherwise we know would create a burden in the ecosystem? And I think every sort of lever that you might have, thinking about how you make that access available, how do you remove the barriers and the burdens, that's the work for the ecosystem to actually come into fruition. That might be, how do I amplify, as I think you mentioned you're a brand marketer, how do I amplify someone's voice in a room that they might not have otherwise been in? How do I make sure that people are paid fairly for something? Like really, all of us have so many tools at our disposal because we participate in this ecosystem by virtue of being in these industries. Everyone has something to contribute. And for us, it's going to be technology, and then also spaces to even have those engagements around imagination, like funding writers' rooms that are exploring Afrofuturism and Arab futurism, and saying, look, we're going to give you time and money and space to think about the application of some of this literature into stories, because that's a lever in the ecosystem we can do. We can make space for you to imagine something. We don't know what's going to happen from there. That's someone else in the ecosystem, but our job can be space, and it can also be like other products and tools that might help you. So that's my thought on ecosystems. Before I get to laws, I feel like you'll have ecosystems.
Well, no, I actually think that's like also just a great invitation to everybody to sort of be an agent for an affirmative vision where you are. Like I think about, drug development's a great example, and I'm sure the person below who asked the question is that you've pursued this. Like it used to be very expensive to get information about orphan diseases or niche populations for pharmaceutical companies, and also very expensive to market to them. And social media has been really powerful in getting new drugs developed that wouldn't otherwise be developed, and helping them get to the people that need them. And I think thinking about how can I be an activist for that use of technology as opposed to sort of intensifying the kind of broad and narrowcast model within an industry like pharmaceutical development. It's amazing. And I love your invitation to say, like, wherever we are, we can be an activist for a different vision for what technology is for. Laws.
Laws. How many hours do you have? No, what's so interesting about the trajectory of this work is like even thinking about, I was in a law firm, 15 years ago now? And at the time we were like, right of publicity laws. Is that going to be a thing? Like California is passing some laws around this. And what is the right of publicity? It is basically your ability to control how someone else uses your likeness. Like you can't decide to make a fictional story about me because I'll have something to say about that.
I've been pitching that all week.
Well, it's funny actually because where a lot of the
tech hero
parts where right of publicity laws landed is that there were protections for people whose estates have monetary value, but not for regular people. And so the unfortunate trajectory of the laws and also how legislation unfolds is that for areas in which and for clients who there's money involved, you'll see more and more protections. And in fact, like there are a lot of bills that are being proposed around right of publicity using the acceleration of AI's capability to like deep fake or mimic or recreate, creating this incentive to be like, whoa, that's intellectual property and that has value, we should protect it. But actually not answering the upstream sort of philosophical questions of like, do you control your own likeness or your voice or what you say? Like that sort of engagement with the philosophical upstream and who gets that control and should it only be for people who can pay for it versus people who can't? That debate is unfolding in like law review articles, but not really in the progression of the law. And that's an area where like if I were still practicing in that particular arena, that'd be a fun area to play in.
And a really important area for artists like the folks in this room, I think, to be engaged in. Something that Ashley from our team talks a lot about, is the point that you made, right? Which is we actually want a future where like people can do the work of making great art and can live off it. That's actually not the world we live in. And part of that is because of the truism that in general, the intellectual property regime favors publishers and doesn't favor artists. So it's not a question of just making sure that the future isn't worse than the past. It's actually a question of can we build a future that's better than the present and the past.
Yeah, one thing a provocation I received the other day from a property law professor of all people. I went back to my law school for something. They were like, "Do you know about the history of trusts?" And I was like, "I don't. Does anyone in this room know about the history of why trusts exist?" A little bit. Okay, so this is not new for you, but for me it blew my mind. I did nominally at least go to this property class, but I did not remember being taught this. And so the idea was that there was a man in England whose wife had passed away and he had a young daughter, and he realized in looking at his daughter and understanding his own mortality that if he were to pass, there would be no way to protect his daughter because his daughter could not legally inherit property or money for him. So his daughter would be at the whims of other family members, and he didn't really trust those family members. So he was like, what can we do to create some sort of device that is an improvement here? Like, what can I do? And he was a very creative lawyer, and he invented the idea, the legal fiction of a trust, where he's like, this is a legal structure, I'm making it up, okay? I'm just making it up, but I will bequeath all of my money and my resource to this trust, and it will act in the best interests of my child.
And it will never be hijacked for
Ever.
transgenerational wealth aggregation,
Right.
ever.
Peter Thiel came in. But what's so fascinating about the trust is this is a legal device born out of love for someone. And if we can start to think about the law as a device for deploying not just allocation of capital and resource, but what does it look like to have a legal device here that is oriented and motivated by love? Love for creativity, love for human creation, love for our ability to connect with one another. If that's the motivation instead, what could we get that's different? And what is that fundamentally? That is an act of imagination, right? That's an act of imagination rooted by something we actually care about. That's the call to arms for this time, right? We just like the things that got us here, the tools of the past are not getting us to the future. So how can we reimagine everything we do to at least try and have a fighting chance at something better?
Well, and a reminder, like, this isn't all technology is. You know, the laws
Right.
of technology, norms are technology, right? That there are other tools that are in our power that we bring into it, we modify the world with, that we can use to serve our interest. We're not, it isn't just someone else's interest who sort of determines what the trappings of the world are.
Or even how we use it, right? Like when I think about the phone and all of the various downsides of having a surveillance device on me at all times, I also think about FaceTime. Like, my parents were immigrants to the United States, and they have so many stories about waiting until 9 p.m. before they would call anyone, or like waiting because and long distance calling to call back to Pakistan was so expensive. Yeah. They'd wait until the weekend at a particular time to call. And I remember when my dad first got an iPhone and he FaceTimed my family that was still in Karachi, he was like, I dreamt of this, right? Like, I dreamt about the ability to see my loved ones on a moment's notice in my hand, and I never thought that would be possible. And so when we engage with technology, how can we embrace the things that are beautiful and human, and maybe try to diminish, you know, the parts that are bad? And that's the work, right? And to me, and I know we were talking about this backstage a little bit, like, the sort of meta work at the moment is like, can we bring creative people into the design of technology at upstream moments? So we're designing in a way that maximizes these things that make us equipped to do the most human, wonderful things of talking to our loved ones and sharing our stories and being like, here's what my life is, here's what your life is, and not distract us, make us crazy, and all the other bad things that come with tech.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end on than the exhortation to embrace what's beautiful and human. So, Nabiha, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon to share your insights.
Thank you, Sam.
If you had a question but didn't get to ask it, like Nabiha, I'm sure Nabiha will hang out for a few minutes. But thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everybody.